Welcome you today to the Spiritual Engagement Hour at the Metropolitan Community Church of Washington, D.C., here at Fifth and Ridge. We're located halfway between the White House and the Capitol. And so our theme today is telling our truth. That theme will go ahead and be part of this time as well as our worship service today. We're seeing how important it is during these times to be a people willing to courageously speak up and to speak out. We'll be talking about that more today. I bring you greetings as well from our Associate Pastor, Reverend Kathy Alexander, who is involved with our music engagement hour, which is preparation for our worship service. I would love to hear from you. My email is revdwayne@MCCDC. And Reverend Kathy would love to hear from you. Her email is revkathy with a C at mccdc.com. As we enter into this important conversation today, I invite us to take a moment to center, to find a place where we can touch the foundation of grace. For those of you online or on demand, we invite you to consider lighting a candle or having something nearby that draws you to the sacred. Perhaps one of our siblings from creation, a plant or a pet, with you during this time for those online or on demand. Okay, let's just take that moment now. Notice if there's any places of tension, any places that hurt. Notice what's happening in your body. Our body, mind, and spirit, we open and we gather. To help us today to go deeper into our understanding of truth and sharing our truth, conveying our truth, speaking our truth, to help us become that spiritual force for good in this world and for our neighbors. We thank you. Amen. So you might notice the nuance today that our theme is telling your truth, telling our truth. It's not telling the truth. And that's partly intentional because we each have a different approach to how we experience truth. And one of the things that I think leads to conflict is people saying, this is the truth, and the other person saying, this is the truth. And it can lead to a lot of conflict that's unnecessary, yet our truth must be spoken, and your truth must be spoken, must be conveyed. And when I use the word speak, I'm incorporating as well nonverbal communication. Those who write, there are some who do not have the capacity to physically speak, and yet they spiritually speak in so many other ways, including through American Sign Language. So we acknowledge that as well. Every Sunday, as we open our worship service, one of the things we say is that we don't all believe the same things, and we don't always agree. And we see that as an important value. And one of our growing edges is learning what it means to not avoid conflict, but to see conflict as an opportunity and a chance to go deeper into our stories and into our understandings of God and each other, as well as finding our place to make a positive difference in this world. So I'll begin with this question today for you to consider. And it's simply this: why is it important to tell our truths? Why is it important to tell our truths or convey our truths?
I think it's important because somebody else may have the same truth and think that their truth is they're the only ones with that truth. So sharing my truth will let them know that they're not alone.
Yes.
Or whatever they might be going through. May have shared the same experience coming from a different path, but have the same truth.
Yeah, I certainly think that's true, Cappy. I also am very aware, I've learned over the years that if I don't, or when I don't, speak my own truth, it oftentimes gets sort of sour inside of me, gets sort of balled up, it gets kind of messy. And then I have attitude that I don't even know why I'm
Mhm.
having it, because I haven't said the thing that's really needing to be said. So then it comes out in other ways that aren't so congenial or so, kind or whatever. So I think it's both about being there for others. It's also about being whole ourselves.
Thank you.
If we, and not telling our own truth, what can happen is someone else can tell what they think is your truth, but it's not really your story, but they're speaking for you.
Mhm.
And in order to speak for yourself, and not allow other people to tell your story, that it's important to tell our truth, your own truth, and to also to be able to live authentically.
Yes. Thank you. Good thoughts. And one thought that I've been contemplating going into this is that it's a matter of life or death in many cases. A matter of life or death. And I lived through and continue to remember very well when HIV and AIDS was really at its peak. And there was a slogan that came out at that time that I think remains very, very important. It was the simple phrase, silence equals death.
Yes.
And I oftentimes said truth equals life. And we did a series on that when I was pastoring in Richmond, that silence equals death, truth equals life, based on Matthew 6:33. And one of the resources we're using during this season is by E. Carrington Heath. And they speak to that when they write, our silence can indeed equal death, and not just our own. It can mean literal death for our neighbors and fellow citizens. Our willingness to speak up in the face of bigotry is one measure of how we are willing to truly follow Christ. Every time we allow hateful rhetoric to go unchecked, we legitimate those ideas and provide fertile soil for them to grow. If we are unable to have a mildly uncomfortable conversation with someone we know, how can we expect to be courageous when the fruits of the soil are full grown? And on my mind is the incredible lies being spoken about those who are called toxic invaders of our country. The lies that were told that these quote unquote toxic invaders are eating pets and those kinds of things. And it sounds ridiculous, and yet I think that's a deadly lie. And I think it's important to notice the sort of language that's being used to create fear. And I don't even use the word immigrant, I use the word new neighbors and new friends. So thoughts on this idea of some examples, if you agree or disagree, again, we don't always agree on everything, and that's part of the context. But do you see examples where silence equals death? And telling your truth equals life? Are some examples of that?
Well, I will jump in here because and I think people know of my commitments to environmental and ecological justice. And if we remain silent in the face of the destruction of our more than human kin, our cousins in the universe, they're dying at unprecedented rates, and we will also, if we do not raise up and speak our truth, that this is wrong and needs to stop, and we need to stop all the things we're doing to kill nature, because it will ultimately kill not only nature but us, and we're part of nature to begin with, so it's all the same thing. But it certainly equals death, that's for sure. And thank you so much, Reverend Dwayne, for reminding me of those days, those AIDS days and HIV days, and the science equals death. Absolutely, so true. And I believe that, speaking is for life. Often, not always, sometimes people speak things that are not very life-giving, but it can very much be for life.
Last year, we had, in our seminary community, we had two young people that died by suicide. They were transgender, and I believe that in some ways that they suffered in silence. Because of whatever they were going through and facing by treatment with other people. So in that instance, I believe that silence equaled death for them. And that perhaps, that they suffered in silence, or that they felt maybe that there was no one there for them. Don't know, but yeah, that really was a hard thing. One was a child of someone from my cohort, and the other was the child of an alum. This was like within a month of each other, and they were friends. They knew each other, were friends. So yeah.
When I think of this silence, reminds me of a quote of a German Lutheran pastor who was very sympathetic to Nazi ideas in the beginning of the 20s and 30s, but later became outspoken critic. And after the war, he became famous with the quote, first they came for the socialists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. And it ends with, then they came for me, there was no one left to speak for me. And so we see how exactly the point you were making, that if we do not speak out for others when we think that does not relate to us because we are not the victim in that case, that we can become the victim later if we let it go unchecked. And so it's a good reminder to look beyond, and I understand also that it stands in conflict with who speaks for me, right? Kind of this tension. Do I allow others to speak for me? Sometimes we have to let others speak for us because we cannot speak for ourselves, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your truth is misrepresented, right? So I think there's a tension there, but I recognize that sometimes we need that community to speak for us.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think this gets at the complexity of this, because I think silence can be stifling and suffocating internally and allow things to happen externally that are horrifying. And speaking is dangerous. And so part of this also is that speaking is dangerous. And so, I also want to say that truth is that speaking out is dangerous and the decision, and I think we've talked about this for many weeks now. The decision to speak out from the bodies we're in particular situations we're in. It can also lead to death. And it can lead to isolation, and it can lead to being ostracized. And I think that goes all the way from within our communities, which we often refuse to talk about and work with, which goes to the issue of conflict and how we deal with conflict within our own families and in our own communities, all the way out to the large social issues we talk about. And that we hope, as we've been talking about, that we're able to speak to and to create a society that is welcoming and affirming of those very often who are put to the margins. So I think it's really complex. The other thing that does come up for me often is what is it like to speak and be in a room and speak about something and have nobody else say anything. And so there you are, you spoke it, and it's like, whoa, okay. And so what does it mean again to do that? And that doesn't mean that was a bad thing. And what does it mean to take that, to make that move or take that step? And what is affirmation and support? And so what is that part of speaking as well? So I think it's really complex, the way it goes from being an individual to being community. And what are decisions around that individually out to community is obviously, for me, obviously, it's a really important time around those things. It's really complex.
Yeah.
And I feel, it's really complex. I think many things about it at the same time. Yeah.
Yes.
To that point, I certainly share that, and thank you, Carla. Dr. Carla, I think it's also something that reminds me that some of us are in better positions to speak, that are in safer positions to speak sometimes than others, will be paid more attention and so on, and will make it easier for people who are more precariously located in society and so on, who need people speaking. And so comfort can get in the way sometimes of our speaking, even though we can. And I want to remember that for myself as a white man in a society that still has troubles with people who aren't white and male, among other things. So just a thought there too.
Yeah, which goes to power and how power impacts.
Yep.
When, for me, it's always about where I want to remind myself where is power and how is power working on me in terms of when I think I can speak and when I think I can't, and when I can and when I can't. And I'm using those words intentionally. And when I feel able to and not, and when others are and not. So often it's about power and recognition of that over and over again.
Yep.
That's interesting. We're looking at can't and won't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm using those words very intentionally because I think those are the decisions about making the decision that I cannot in this moment. Because maybe for me in that moment, I've decided the stakes are not where I'm going. And so a can't can be a can't for me. and a won't may go with that can't. And then, or I am not able at this time because I'm ill, or I am not able because the stakes are so high, I will not be able to be in this community if I do this in this moment. And so that can be a can't. And so what will that mean? What are the consequences? And so I think can'ts exist in this, and I think it's a really interesting word. And then and then what is being able? And what is deciding I won't, I'm not gonna.
Well, I think it all
Yeah.
boils down to choice.
It does. Yeah.
And as far as silence equals death, I'm wary of slogan that is stated without the reason for the slogan. And silence equals death means if in that era, if you did not speak up and say, I'm infected with HIV or AIDS, and you have a sexual relationship with someone who is infected and hasn't spoken, then that's your death. And I think that's a lot of what that slogan was talking about. And on the flip side of that, if you spoke out, that was death. Because people were treated horribly when they spoke out and say, I have HIV or AIDS. So the slogan for that era was that. But I don't think we can use that slogan for everything. It was specific to what was happening then.
Yeah, another big part of the context was at that time, there was not, they were fighting for governmental funding. So the actual direction of that was the fact that the president at that time had not even used the word AIDS or gay for that matter. And so a lot of it was about advocacy around, around research and around funding. And you're right that we have to be aware when we use slogans that there is a lot of complexity that needs to be acknowledged with that.
At the same time, I'll go back to my point about speaking up when we are not diseased, but we are caring and concerned for people who are suffering and who need help. And so when we're healthy, we can speak our truth. And if we don't, it means death for others. And that's very important.
And I think it's also possible in communities to be strategic. And I think this is the community piece as well. What does it mean to know that you have people what does it mean to know, and I'll go back to I, because that's what I'm speaking to. What does it mean to be in community and have people in community who I can have overt conversations with about this is not a place I can speak, or I will speak, or I'm willing to speak, and actually your speaking about that is more effective in this context. So you speak about this. And I'm not talking about putting words in your mouth. What does that mean for you from your context? And maybe that you're the person from your context that is in the quote, the power context in terms of what society says. And so this is a place where you express. And so having folks in that context often call folks who are allies or folks in solidarity or folks who are support, and being able to overtly have those conversations is strategy, and is also about genuine support and relationship. Can be, and it also, in broader advocacy situations, it's like, I don't know you well, but that's why we're here together. Who is going to speak in this moment around this thing. Because strategically that makes the most sense in terms of what's trying to be accomplished. And then that happens one-on-one in relationship. You know, one of my running jokes that is not a joke, is the places that I go in my body as a Black woman, where I have white men who are friends, who I can call and say, I need this taken care of. I need to go find out about this. Will you go with me and speak? Because it's going to take me an hour to get somebody to hear what I am saying. And I'm using this language intentionally. And if you go in 10 minutes, this will get taken care of. Will you come with me and take care of this? So there are two people in my life who will do that. And that is intentional. And because that's the way that is. And so there's a whole nother thing around speaking and support and reality about speaking.
Yeah.
And it's only those two people, by the way, too, because we've had those conversations very honestly about that not being about me having to give up power. It's a very overt conversation about how the world works in certain situations. And it's like, hey, can you help me out here?
Yeah, it's like the voice. The voice that can help the most,
Mhm.
rather than it's such a fine.
It's such a fine line. And those two people, because those two people also do not take over. There is here's what needs to be done. And also checking in. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Is this what we're really doing? Yep, that's right. Okay, back to it. So not taking over. Yeah.
Here in this neighborhood, there's the whole issue of gentrification and lots of issues related to that. And right across the street from us on Fifth Street is a future development. When that was proposed, there was a lot of community tension around that, rightly so, because people were losing their homes, and they did. And at one community meeting, the place was absolutely packed. And the lawyers and the developers were there, and they came time for questions. And I noticed that the people who they were calling on were the people of privilege. In the meantime, there was a person next to me of color, a woman of color, who was waving her hand. Now, we were pretty much, towards the back, but in the center, there was no way they did not see that. In fact, I saw them see her hand and move on. And I immediately had this sense of, I raised my hand, I have a feeling I'm going to get called on immediately. So I thought, so I did it. And of course, I was immediately called on. And I said, my neighbor would like to speak. And she stood up and was very, very powerful in what she shared. And that's one of those situations where because I'm also aware of the quote unquote kind of the white messiah complex, which also plays into this. And so I was really, but I thought, she needs to speak. And they're not going to call on her.
In 2024.
Well, this happened, basically. I mean, this was just a little bit before COVID. That's part of what stalled the project.
I saw this gentrification stuff, when the Blacks were moved out of Southeast, out of, Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
And, everybody went to Prince George's County.
Mhm.
And it's like, and then when Blacks started moving down to Waldorf, then they went further down to La Plata. There's this gentrification and the movement and the placement. They used to call DC Chocolate City. I think they still might, some folks still might call it Chocolate City. but such gentrification has occurred over by St. Elizabeth's Hospital. They said, oh, this is gonna be affordable housing.
Mhm.
And I see $800,000.
Sure, yeah. So that's a area, and even this week, when it comes to when do you speak out, and Pizza created a dessert that was spoofing our former mayor, Marion Barry. It was a Marion, they were advertising it with all these references that were not so subtle towards cocaine use and the powdered sugar on this. And it was just unbelievable that this is happening in 2024. And of course, the family, many impacted, many who had been lifted by his life, an imperfect life. Yes, all of our lives are. But I mean, there was protesters, others who showed up, and of course, they pulled that advertising. But that's an example of where one cannot be silent when a person's memory is, dishonored is too weak a word.
Yeah, I mean, Mayor Barry was a character. Everybody knows that, but he did such good. You know, and my thing is, you know, just because you're an official doesn't mean that you don't put your pants on the same way as I put my pants on. You know, unless your name is Jesus, you know,
He put his
you're
pants
not
on.
perfect. When you have no pants.
Whatever, bro, whatever he wore.
But people's expectation of human beings that are imperfect. It's, you know, they try to hold them to, I guess, the standard of Christ. And that's not to be true. So look at the good that people are doing. They're not hurting other people, they're hurting themselves. You know, I've seen, pastors and bishops in pulpit and know what they do in real life, but the effect that they have on people is so strong. God is using them for something. But, you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, they're not human. You know, and have humanist things that go on in life. So,
I think this does speak to, pun intended, you know, about expressing or speaking one's understanding or truth. Also has to do with where or how that gets accessed. You know, so how does that get heard? You know, where's the platform? And so, because it's possible that one can do that and that get blocked, or how does that happen? So again, it goes back to how does one get access to have that travel? Because the thing that happened around Marion Barry this week, one of the things I said to myself a number of times is how did folks get access that turned that into something that was on the news? It was in the news cycle for a number of hours. And so, you know, what gets heard and what does not get heard? You know, and that goes to power as well. And so how does that happen? And so again, it's who's
behind that,
who's
you know, who's jealous?
Yeah.
Who wants to go ahead and put somebody else down so they can get elevated?
Yeah. So the dynamics around who has the power and the position to go ahead and do that. And it's not a reason not to speak. Sometimes it's a reason absolutely to go ahead and voice and express. And it is interesting around who gets access. Yeah.
Yeah. And what steps can we take, what processes can we put in place to make access accessible?
Mhm.
How do we help communicate around that? I know with WTOP, one of our neighbors, transgender community, was murdered. And in their report, they said that she was murdered in a neighborhood known for sex, I forget their language they use, but that was,
So
I just, yeah. And I was in the car with Andre, we were going somewhere, and I just became so livid that I just immediately called WTOP, and they didn't pick up, but there was a place where one could leave a message. And I said, you are blaming the victim. I went through all that, it was just furious. And within an hour, they had changed the newscast, how they were framing it, and they simply mentioned, that this person had died. And they didn't frame the location, and by implication, describe the person. But again, who has access? Well, do people know what the vehicles are, what the venues are too? And I didn't know if they would, how WTOP would respond. But somewhere I've gotten the idea that there was a way to access those who were sharing what I would consider grave misinformation. So that could be part of the work to do, is education around access, or creating access, figuring that out. It's a very important piece.
Education around how to speak out. And, what vehicles are available. And what demeanor is required to be heard. And like, Dr. Caller said, she'll ask somebody to go and speak because she knows that her voice is not going to be heard for hours, where somebody else's voice is going to be heard right away. And how to do that education is really important. As I'm dealing with the medical community now, it's like with my cousin, the medical community is more responsive to her needs now because someone spoke out in a way that's acceptable to the medical community, to let them know, I'm watching you and you need to do this, 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 and this. But speaking out has made her journey easier, but not everyone has that experience to be able to do that. And so many people in the medical realm are not being heard. And doctors are not being proactive, they're being reactive. And it's a huge problem in communities that don't have that access to the knowledge and the experience to talk to the medical community.
Well, I think I think what goes with that business of there are times to have somebody who's going to be heard immediately is to also use that to leverage then to say, okay, and you also, and here are folks who are going to come present in ways that you have not responded to, and you have to be able to respond to a wider range of human beings. And so you have to open up your range of response to a wider range of human beings and a wider range of expression. And, there's the work. So that the disparity isn't so great.
Exactly.
Yeah, because the disparity is outrageous.
It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Totally outrageous. And we laugh now because she says, oh, she was telling her brother, she said, yeah, Kathy speaks, they listen to her like that. I said, when Ian Putnam speaks, everybody.
But
Yeah.
It made a difference.
yes,
It made a difference. This one time we're in the waiting room for radiation therapy, and it's been longer than normal. So I went to the window, I said, is there a problem? And they said, oh, I said, we never waited this long.
Yeah.
And before I could sit down, they called it. That.
yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing it speaks to that I think, I have to feel like it's a catch-22 to acknowledge in particular, from the marginalized position, very often the part of me that is pushed to the margins, and I do speak for others because I know so many people that I engage. I think, spiritual care conversations with, support with, is what does it mean to say that you get tired, you know, of being in a position to speak, to express, and know that the message, that folks do not want to hear the message, that it is not going to be responded to well, that it is not going to be listened to, that it is going to take 2 hours more than it should, or 2 minutes more than it should, and what it means to be tired of that, what it means to be worn out, to need a rest, what it means, what that really means, and that is a reality, and that doesn't mean that you're less than, that you get to be human. And that and so sometimes the message of you need to speak can end up feeling very heavy and almost like, well, you need to be superhuman. Well, I get to be human. And so that it's so important. I keep having that conversation come up, and folks wanting support around being tired. And needing support for, you get to be tired, you get to be worn out by this. And what kind of support to just be able to have your hand held and be told, you know, of course you're tired, of course you're tired. Yeah.
There's a song that's been sung here many times, and it has a lot of value. It's a song, I feel like going on. I feel like going on. And it's a song of faith, so I'm not trying to discount it in any way, but there'd been more than once when I've heard the song and thought, well, how about the song I don't feel like going on? And then where does our faith show up when that's our song? I don't feel like going on. Then what song would speak to that? Because sometimes that is where we're. So thank you, Dr. Carla, for sharing that reality, which also plays into that whole question about you know, knowing when, what, or not, when it comes to the truth telling.
Well, and sometimes when you get to just say, I'm tired, it gives you your next lift.
Right.
And it's brutal to not have anywhere to say, and I'm tired because I'm human. And so there is that as well. Yeah.
As much as I love caring for my cousin, I get tired.
Yeah.
I joined
Yeah.
for specifically it's this organization,
Yes.
and it's support for the supporters.
Yes.
And you can pick, you know, any type of cancer you want to pick,
Yes.
and you know,
Yes.
communicate with other people that are tired too.
Yeah.
But the group keeps me up for my cousin.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and she gets tired,
Yeah.
and I can be there to say, okay, I understand you're tired, but we're gonna get through this together.
Yeah.
And it's all the difference in the world. But if I'm a wreck, I'm not gonna be able to help them.
Yes. Right. Well, as always, rich, important conversation that will continue. We've touched on this in various ways, so we will, you know, wind back. Audrey Lord raised many of these issues, and there's another one who I think shows us a lot about what it means. So we'll go back to her again soon, and other voices that are teaching us and helping us. But again, thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability, sharing your truth today and your stories during this time. We'll continue to weave this and similar topics. An emergent topic that I think will be important for us to talk about at some point is the theme of regret, which we've talked about. When one looks back on the situation, for example, and wishes they had spoken up or shared their truth, or shared a truth in a situation and then does not, and feels regret later. How do we work with that? So that's another topic to just kind of telescope a little bit today that I've been thinking a lot about because it has come up. And what are some ways that we can support each other in community around the issue of regret? So stay posted, stay present, and thank you again. Invite us to receive another breath. And check in with our bodies, our spirits, our minds. Holy One, Holy Truth Teller, continue to show us and lead us, expand our understanding. Continue to teach us what it means to be a loved community and bold community. We praise you and we thank you in your many names. In the name of Jesus and all that's holy. Amen. Thank you for being with us today. For those of you again on demand, online, we'd love to hear from you. Rev Dwayne at MCCDC.com or Rev Kathy with a C at MCCDC.com. Thank you.